Good morning. When I was young, I was born in the 50s, only just in the 50s, but it was definitely the 50s of where I was born. But the Second World War was still very, very fresh in the memory of everybody around me. People have all lived through it, and they'd all, we were brought up on a diet of the evil Germans and, what have you. And I'm not saying what's right and what's wrong and what's true and what's not true. But because of my age, I was brought up, learning about the Second World War from a certain perspective, from a British perspective. And we were very, very grateful to the Russians, because the Russians in the Second World War lost 26 million people fighting Germany and the National Socialists. So the Socialists and the National Socialists were having one hell of a scrap. And if it wasn't for Russia, I mean, everybody says America and everything like that, but if it wasn't for Russia, I don't think we could have beaten Germany, because the Germans were fighting on several fronts, and that's what actually split them up and made it possible for them to be beat. If we had the full might of the German army against the Western allies, I think we would have struggled. And I think, things might have turned out a lot differently, a lot more different. But now we have the history of the Second World War being rewritten to suit their current narrative. And Ursula von der, whatever her name is, European Commissioner, stated the other day in a speech, or implied in this speech, and if you read her speech, she does imply that it was the Russians that dropped the bombs on Japan, Nagasaki and Hiroshima, when it was the Americans. But in her speech, she applied. So a lot of kids are growing up today not knowing what really happened, the Second World War. And a lot of them, I mean, I actually I asked a couple of questions the other day to some school kids, like, and who were we fighting in the Second World War? And their answer was Russia. Not that they've been told explicitly that we were fighting Russia. It's just that they assume it from the way the current narrative on the media is being told. And then we had Justin Trudeau's Parliament honouring, a Waffen SS officer. Well, I need to say something about this, actually. That something is nobody's ever pointed out. The guy is 92 years old. Okay. In the Second World War, he would have been, at the end of the Second World War, he would have been 20. He was only a child, really, a very young man during the Second World War. They're forgetting that. So if he fought for the Waffen SS, which apparently he did, then he would have been fighting as a very, very young man, which does change things a little bit. It needs to be noted. He was a evil SS officer. Yeah, he was a boy. Okay, so I wouldn't get that. But he was on Ukraine's side, and what we have to remember, which people do not remember, that Ukraine was on Germany's side. And, well, a lot of Ukraine was on Germany's side, and we have to sort of like, remember that. So it comes down to that sketch that was on British comedy series, where the two guys dressed in SS uniforms look at each other and saying, we're waiting for the Russians and we're going to fight the Russians. And then one says to the other, he says, what side are we on? He says, we're on the Nazi side. And he said, but are we the goodies or are we the baddies? Because we've got skulls on our emblems. It makes us look quite like the baddies. And it's quite a funny scene, but it's quite a take. But so it's the rewriting. I think Boris Johnson even said something about Ukraine fighting the Russians, as if the Russians were bad. Russians in the Second World War, for all you young people out there, were our allies. We were allied to Russia in the Second World War, and we were even sending them equipment. I think there was an exchange of equipment and personnel at times as well. But their ideology and the Western ideology thing, and we ended up with the Cold War because we'd fought a massive war against the Germans, and I didn't think anybody had the stomach for another war to carry on, and so we ended up with the Cold War, which Ronald Reagan sort of like put an end to, which was probably one of the best things Ronald Reagan did. I mean, not knowing whether I was a fan of Ronald Reagan or not, but everything's very, very complicated. History is always very, very complicated. And we must remember that, as the old Romans used to say, history was written by the victors. And so it's always, always political. History is always, always political. It's who won, who gets to write the history. And, even the story of Nazi Germany, there are a lot of questions over what we were taught about that. I mean, basically, when I was, it was just, evil, 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 But there are some things within Germany in the 1930s, the financial situation and everything like that, it's astounding. It's almost like a financial miracle. If you look out there, a very, very small boat. But if you're young, do not believe the implied history that you're getting through the propaganda of the MSN. It's really, 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 I think that's quite evil. The way that, because of the Nazis in Ukraine, and you must know that the Nazis are running Ukraine to this day. They never went away. They still are running Ukraine today. And we, anybody who says, support Ukraine, they are actually saying support the Nazis, which is saying support Hitler. So it's a complete 180. Once again, the Russians are fighting Nazism. But this time, the West is supporting Nazism. And that cannot be denied. because the Azov Brigade and everything like that, it's all out in the open. That they are open Nazis. But learn your history. History's really, really good. And Rome, the history of Rome, several things have been written in Roman times that really do apply today. And it's interesting. It's very, very interesting. Anyway, peace and love, people. But learn your history and don't believe what you're told. Learn it from very many sources and make your own mind up.